Picture this: Paris, 1943. A young woman walks through Nazi checkpoints carrying a suitcase. Inside, a 20-pound radio transmitter that could get her killed on the spot. She's not a trained soldier. She's a children's book author who sees fairies and writes poetry. Her training officers said she was too clumsy, too gentle, too trusting to ever survive as a spy. They were dead wrong. This is the story of Noor Inayat Khan. And trust me when I say Hollywood couldn't make this up. An Indian princess born in a Russian monastery, raised in Paris by a mystical Sufi father, who became the first female radio operator dropped behind enemy lines in Nazi-occupied France. She lasted 6 months, when the average spy survived just 6 weeks, and when the entire resistance network around her collapsed, when every other agent fled or got captured, she stayed, alone. The only link between London and the French resistance, but here's the thing that really gets me. Noor wasn't supposed to be a spy at all. She was a pacifist. Her whole life was about peace, music, and children's stories. The woman was literally afraid of guns. So how does someone like that end up becoming one of Churchill's most valuable secret agents? How does a gentle soul who believed in the goodness of people survive in the darkest heart of Nazi terror? The answer will surprise you, break your heart, and maybe change how you think about courage. See, Noor's story starts in the most unexpected place, not in some military academy or spy school, but in a monastery outside Moscow on New Year's Day, 1914. Her father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, was this incredible figure. Imagine a descendant of Tipu Sultan, the Tiger of Mysore, who fought against British rule in India. But Hazrat didn't follow in those warrior footsteps. Instead, he picked up a veena, an Indian musical instrument, and decided to spread a message of universal love and peace across the world. Her mother, an American girl from Iowa named Ora Ray Baker, who literally ran away from her family to marry this Indian musician. Can you imagine the scandal? This was 1913, an American woman marrying an Indian Sufi teacher and touring Europe together. Her family disowned her, but she didn't care. She followed love halfway across the world. So Noor is born into this extraordinary family in Moscow, right as World War I is about to tear Europe apart. Her name meant light of womanhood in Arabic. At home, they called her Babuli, and from day one her life was anything but ordinary. The family had to flee Moscow because, well, 1914, Russia wasn't exactly stable. They landed in London, lived through World War I, and then when Noor was 6, they moved to this beautiful house outside Paris called Faisal Manzil, which means house of blessing, and it really was blessed. Picture this open home, filled with music, meditation, Sufis from around the world, visiting, kids playing in the garden, looking out over the lights of Paris. It was paradise. Noor's father taught them something powerful every single day. He'd give each child a virtue to work on, and at dinner, they had to report what they'd done that day to practice that virtue. If they failed, they chose their own punishment. One day, little Noor said something that perfectly captured who she was. "I wanted to be bad, but my goodness prevented me." Think about that for a second. Even as a child, she was wrestling with this deep inner goodness. Her father taught that every religion had truth, that compassion was everything, that you found God through serving others, duty above self, always. But then tragedy struck. When Noor was just 13, her father went back to India and died suddenly. Her mother completely fell apart with grief and just withdrew from the world. And overnight, this 13-year-old girl had to become the mother to her 3 younger siblings. She had to hold the family together. So she did what a lot of us do when life gets overwhelming. She wrote poetry, short stories, children's tales. She found escape and meaning in these beautiful stories. She studied child psychology at the Sorbonne, trained in music, and started getting her children's stories published in Le Figaro, one of France's biggest newspapers. By 25, she'd published her first book, 20 Jodhika Tales, these gorgeous retellings of Buddhist stories about kindness and wisdom. Everything was falling into place. She was becoming a successful writer. Life in Paris was good. The future looked bright. And then Hitler invaded Poland, and then France. And suddenly, everything Noor believed in, everything her father taught her about peace and universal love, was being crushed under Nazi boots. Now here's where the story really begins. Because Noor had to make a choice. Stick with her pacifist beliefs and stay safe. Or do something dangerous, something that went against everything she was taught, to fight evil. What would you do? February 1943. Noor's spy training was in full swing, and honestly, it wasn't going great, at least not on paper. They sent her first to Wanborough Manor near Guildford. This wasn't some fancy estate anymore. The SO had turned it into what was basically spy boot camp. She was in a class with 3 other women and 6 men. One of those women was Yolande Beek. Another was Cecily Lafort. All 3 would end up in France together. All 3 would end up dead. But nobody knew that yet. At Wanborough, they were just trying to figure out if these recruits could handle the mission. The course lasted 3 weeks of pure intensity: physical fitness, armed combat, unarmed combat, cross-country navigation, wireless operations. They pushed everyone to their limits to see who would break. Noor tried. God, she tried so hard. While other trainees would finish their exercises and rest, Noor would keep going, doing extra physical training, practicing more. But her training reports were brutal. She was scared of weapons. Her athletic performance was poor. She was clumsy. One instructor wrote that she was not overburdened with brains. Harsh, right? But here's the thing, they weren't being mean. They were being honest, because sending someone unprepared into Nazi-occupied France was basically sending them to their death. After Wanborough, she went to other training locations: Aylesbury, then Bolu. Each place taught different skills. At Bolu, they really got into the deep spy craft: how to create and maintain a cover story, how to spot a tail, how to identify safe houses, how to work with resistance networks, how to survive interrogation. That mock Gestapo interrogation is worth talking about. They'd wake you up in the middle of the night, drag you to a room, shine lights in your eyes, scream at you in German, threaten you, try to break you psychologically. It was supposed to prepare you for the real thing. Nobody could prepare you for the real thing, but they tried. Now, despite all the bad reports, something interesting was happening. Vera Atkins, the intelligence officer who basically ran operations for the F section, F for France. She was watching Noor carefully. Atkins was this sharp, intuitive woman who understood that not everything shows up in training reports. She took Noor out for lunch at a restaurant in Mayfair, just the 2 of them, and she gave Noor an out. She said, essentially, look, I can see this is really difficult for you. Nobody will think less of you if you back out now. It's okay to say this isn't for you, but Noor wouldn't take it. Her commitment was absolute. She knew what was at stake. She'd seen Paris fall. She'd fled her home. She'd watched the Nazis crush everything beautiful about the world her father built, and she had the skills they needed. She spoke perfect French. She knew Paris intimately. She was an excellent radio operator. Atkins made the call. Noor was in. They gave her a code name, Madeleine. Beautiful name, right? They created a fake identity for her, Marie Renier, a children's nurse. They made false papers, gave her French francs, a pistol, and 4 pills. One of those pills was cyanide, in case things went really wrong and she needed a way out. Think about that moment when they handed her that pill. This woman who wrote children's stories about Buddhist monks and kindness, now holding a suicide pill. The date was set. June 16th, 1943. She'd fly at night from England to France, dropped by parachute into occupied territory. The mission: join the Prosper Network, the biggest and most important resistance network SOE had in France. Work as their wireless operator, send intelligence back to London, coordinate weapons drops, help organize resistance activities. The life expectancy for a wireless operator in occupied France at that time was 6 weeks. 6 weeks? Some didn't last 6 days. The Gestapo had gotten really good at detecting radio transmissions. They had these detection vans that could triangulate where signals were coming from. They'd listen for the patterns, the timing, the distinctive fist of each operator. And when they found you, they didn't just arrest you. They tortured you for information, then typically executed you. So on June 16th, under cover of darkness, Noor boarded a Lysander aircraft, small plane, flying low to avoid German radar. She wore civilian clothes, not a uniform. That was important if she was in civilian clothes conducting military operations. The Germans didn't have to treat her as a prisoner of war. They could do whatever they wanted to her. She carried her radio equipment, her false papers, her pistol, and her poison pill. Her mother didn't know where she was going. The British government had told her family Noor was being sent to an unnamed post where she could not be reached. The plane crossed the English Channel in darkness. Noor must have been terrified, but also determined. This was it. This was her chance to fight back against everything she hated about what the Nazis represented. They landed in a field northeast of Angers in northwestern France. 3 other agents were with her on that flight. All 4 would eventually die as Nazi captives. Waiting for them on the ground was Henry Dericourt, the SOE's air operations officer in France. February 1943. Noor's spy training was in full swing, and honestly, it wasn't going great, at least not on paper. They sent her first to Wanbro Manor near Guildford. This wasn't some fancy estate anymore. The SO had turned it into what was basically spy boot camp. She was in a class with 3 other women and 6 men. One of those women was Yolande Beek. Another was Cecily Lafort. All 3 would end up in France together. All 3 would end up dead. But nobody knew that yet. At Wanbro, they were just trying to figure out if these recruits could handle the mission. The course lasted 3 weeks of pure intensity: physical fitness, armed combat, unarmed combat, cross-country navigation, wireless operations. They pushed everyone to their limits to see who would break. Noor tried. God, she tried so hard. While other trainees would finish their exercises and rest, Noor would keep going, doing extra physical training, practicing more. But her training reports were brutal. She was scared of weapons. Her athletic performance was poor. She was clumsy. One instructor wrote that she was not overburdened with brains. Harsh, right? But here's the thing, they weren't being mean. They were being honest, because sending someone unprepared into Nazi-occupied France was basically sending them to their death. After Wanbro, she went to other training locations: Aylesbury, then Bolu. Each place taught different skills. At Bolu, they really got into the deep spycraft: how to create and maintain a cover story, how to spot a tail, how to identify safe houses, how to work with resistance networks, how to survive interrogation. That mock Gestapo interrogation is worth talking about. They'd wake you up in the middle of the night, drag you to a room, shine lights in your eyes, scream at you in German, threaten you, try to break you psychologically. It was supposed to prepare you for the real thing. Nobody could prepare you for the real thing, but they tried. Now, despite all the bad reports, something interesting was happening. Vera Atkins, the intelligence officer who basically ran operations for the F section, F for France. She was watching Noor carefully. Atkins was this sharp, intuitive woman who understood that not everything shows up in training reports. She took Noor out for lunch at a restaurant in Mayfair, just the 2 of them, and she gave Noor an out. She said, essentially, "Look, I can see this is really difficult for you. Nobody will think less of you if you back out now. It's okay to say this isn't for you," but Noor wouldn't take it. Her commitment was absolute. She knew what was at stake. She'd seen Paris fall. She'd fled her home. She'd watched the Nazis crush everything beautiful about the world her father built, and she had the skills they needed. She spoke perfect French. She knew Paris intimately. She was an excellent radio operator. Atkins made the call. Noor was in. They gave her a code name, Madeleine. Beautiful name, right? They created a fake identity for her, Marie Renier, a children's nurse. They made false papers, gave her French francs, a pistol, and 4 pills. One of those pills was cyanide, in case things went really wrong and she needed a way out. Think about that moment when they handed her that pill. This woman who wrote children's stories about Buddhist monks and kindness, now holding a suicide pill. The date was set. June 16th, 1943. She'd fly at night from England to France, dropped by parachute into occupied territory. The mission: join the Prosper Network, the biggest and most important resistance network SOE had in France. Work as their wireless operator, send intelligence back to London, coordinate weapons drops, help organize resistance activities. The life expectancy for a wireless operator in occupied France at that time was 6 weeks. 6 weeks? Some didn't last 6 days. The Gestapo had gotten really good at detecting radio transmissions. They had these detection vans that could triangulate where signals were coming from. They'd listen for the patterns, the timing, the distinctive fist of each operator. And when they found you, they didn't just arrest you. They tortured you for information, then typically executed you. So on June 16th, under cover of darkness, Noor boarded a Lysander aircraft, small plane, flying low to avoid German radar. She wore civilian clothes, not a uniform. That was important if she was in civilian clothes conducting military operations. The Germans didn't have to treat her as a prisoner of war. They could do whatever they wanted to her. She carried her radio equipment, her false papers, her pistol, and her poison pill. Her mother didn't know where she was going. The British government had told her family Noor was being sent to an unnamed post where she could not be reached. The plane crossed the English Channel in darkness. Noor must have been terrified, but also determined. This was it. This was her chance to fight back against everything she hated about what the Nazis represented. They landed in a field northeast of Angers in northwestern France. 3 other agents were with her on that flight. All 4 would eventually die as Nazi captives. Waiting for them on the ground was Henry Dericourt, the SOE's air operations officer in France. Dericourt gave them bicycles. Can you picture it? British spies arriving in Nazi-occupied France on bicycles like they were just going for a Sunday ride. But that was exactly the point. Look normal. Blend in. Don't attract attention. Noor rode her bicycle to Angers, about 12 kilometers away. From there, she took a train to Paris, just another Frenchwoman traveling home. Nothing to see here. Her false papers said she was Jean-Marie Renier, children's nurse. She had her story memorized, where she was from, where she worked, why she was traveling. Every detail had to be perfect, because one wrong answer at a checkpoint could mean death. The train ride must have been surreal. Noor knew Paris intimately. She'd grown up there, walked those streets, studied at the Sorbonne, published her stories in French newspapers. But this wasn't the Paris she remembered. Now there were swastikas hanging from buildings, German soldiers everywhere. The cafes she loved had Wehrmacht officers sitting at the tables. The City of Light had gone dark. She made it to Paris safely, met up with her contact from the Prosper network, got set up in a safe house, and then she got to work. Her job was straightforward, but incredibly dangerous. Use her radio to communicate with SO headquarters back in London at 64 Baker Street, send intelligence reports, coordinate with other resistance members, let London know when and where weapons could be dropped, help organize the networks that were fighting back against the occupation. The radio itself was disguised in a suitcase, weighed about 20 pounds. Every time she moved locations, she had to lug that thing around, and she had to move constantly because the German detection vans were always hunting. Here's how it worked. She'd set up in a safe location, string up her aerial, and start transmitting in Morse code using her encrypted messages. The messages had special security checks built in, so London knew it was really her and not a German pretending to be her. Each operator had their unique fist, their distinctive rhythm and style of tapping out Morse code. But the Germans had gotten scarily good at finding radio operators. They had these vans driving around Paris with detection equipment, listening for transmissions. Once they picked up a signal, they'd triangulate the location, and if you transmitted for more than about 20 minutes, they could find you. So Noor had to work fast, then pack up everything and move before they closed in. She arrived in Paris on June 17, 1943. Within 10 days, everything went to hell. June 23rd and 24th, the Gestapo arrested the 3 key leaders of the Prosper network, Francis Suttle, Gilbert Norman, and André Borel. Just like that, the most important resistance network in France was decapitated. The Germans had infiltrated the network somehow, and they didn't stop with the leaders. Over the next few days and weeks, they arrested hundreds of resistance operatives and their French allies. It was a catastrophe, and the orders from London were clear. All remaining agents should evacuate immediately. Get out of France while you still can. Everyone left. Everyone except Noor. She made a decision that probably saved hundreds of lives and helped the Allied war effort immeasurably. She decided to stay, because if she left, there would be no communication between London and the Paris resistance. None. All those brave French men and women fighting the Nazis would be cut off. Weapons couldn't be delivered. Intelligence couldn't flow. Allied pilots who got shot down over France couldn't be guided to safety, so Noor stayed. And suddenly, this woman who'd barely finished her training, who her instructors said was too gentle and too trusting, became the only SO radio operator in Paris. Let that sink in. In the most important city in occupied Europe, with the Gestapo actively hunting for radio operators, with detection vans everywhere, Noor was alone. The sole link between London and the resistance. She moved constantly, different apartment every few days, different part of the city, always one step ahead of the Germans. She'd draw on old contacts, people she'd known from her life in Paris before the war. School friends who'd let her transmit from their apartments, her family doctor, anyone she could trust. And here's where Noor's personality, the very thing that made her seem unsuited for spy work, actually became her greatest asset. She was so genuine, so naturally kind and trustworthy that people wanted to help her. They believed in her. They risked their lives for her. She had some incredibly close calls. One time she was on the metro with her radio suitcase. 2 German officers stopped her and started questioning her. Most people would have panicked. Noor stayed completely calm, turned on her charm, and convinced them she was just a harmless young woman traveling with her belongings. They let her go. Another time, Noor was in her apartment, hanging her radio aerial on a tree branch outside her window. It was a tricky operation. The aerial had to be positioned just right for transmission, but it also had to look natural, not like spy equipment. She was concentrating on getting it set up when she heard a voice behind her. "Can I help you, mademoiselle?" Her heart must have stopped. She turned around slowly and found herself face to face with a German officer. He lived in the same apartment building. This was it. This was how it ended. She'd been caught red-handed setting up spy equipment. But Noor didn't panic. Instead, she smiled at him, pretended she was just trying to set up a regular radio aerial because she wanted to listen to music, which was actually illegal to civilians were unsupposed to have radios, but it was a much smaller crime than being a British spy, and the German officer helped her finish setting up the aerial. Half an hour later, that same aerial was transmitting classified intelligence back to London. Can you imagine the nerve that took the presence of mind to stay in character, to think fast, to turn a near disaster into a success? This woman, who was supposedly too gentle for spy work, was running circles around the Gestapo, and the intelligence she was sending was crucial. Arms drop locations, information about German troop movements, coordinating escape routes for downed Allied pilots. Every message she sent saved lives and helped the war effort. Back at SO headquarters in London, they were stunned by her performance. Most radio operators lasted 6 weeks if they were lucky. Noor had been operating for 3 months. 3 months of constant danger, constantly moving, always one step ahead of capture. Her messages were flawless. Her code work was perfect. Leo Marx, the SO's chief cryptographer, felt a special pride in her work. But the Gestapo was closing in. They knew someone was operating in Paris. They could hear the transmissions. They'd built up a profile of the operator. Female, excellent French, moved frequently, codename Madeleine. They had descriptions of her circulating among German security forces. The detection vans were getting closer every time she transmitted. It was only a matter of time. London knew this. They sent her messages urging her to come home. They'd send a plane to pick her up, just get to the extraction point, and they'd get her out. She'd done more than enough. She'd stayed when everyone else fled. She'd kept the Paris network alive for months. It was time to come home. Noor refused. She said the resistance still needed her. There were still missions to coordinate, still intelligence to send, still lives to save. She'd stay until she was forced to leave. By October, she'd managed to do the impossible. She'd survived as the only British radio operator in Paris for nearly 4 months. She'd developed new contacts, rebuilt some of the shattered resistance networks, kept the lines of communication open when they should have been dead. But someone was watching her. Someone who knew who she was. Someone who was about to betray her for money. The most likely suspect was a woman named Renee Gary. Her brother, Emile Henry Gary, was a resistance leader whom Noor worked with. But Renee, Allegedly, suspected that an SOE agent named Franz Enthelm, whom she had feelings for, was interested in Noor. Jealousy, apparently, was about to cost Noor everything. For 100,000 francs, about £500, Renee Gary allegedly sold Noor out to the Germans. She gave them Noor's address. On October 13th or 14th, 1943, the Gestapo came. Noor was in her apartment at 40 Rue Erlanger in the 16th arrondissement. She was preparing to finally take London up on their offer to extract her. She was going to go home, but she never got the chance. The Gestapo burst through the door, and they caught her completely by surprise. She didn't have time to destroy her codes, didn't have time to take her cyanide pill, didn't have time to do anything except fight. And fight she did. Witnesses said she fought like a wildcat, struggling against the German officers who were trying to subdue her. But there were too many of them. They arrested her and dragged her to 84 Avenue Foch, the SD headquarters in Paris. That building was a house of horrors. It's where the Gestapo brought captured agents for interrogation. And by interrogation, I mean torture. They wanted to know everything. Who were her contacts? Where were the other agents? What were the codes? What operations were planned? And Noor told them nothing. Absolutely nothing. The head of the SD in Paris, Hans Kiefer, later testified after the war that Noor didn't give them a single piece of useful information. She lied consistently, made up stories, led them in circles. But she never betrayed her fellow agents or the resistance. The Germans tried everything to break her. They interrogated her for hours. They threatened her. They probably beat her, though the exact details of what happened in those first days are unclear. What we do know is that Noor Inayat Khan, the gentle children's author, who was supposedly too soft for spy work, refused to crack. But the Germans did find something devastating. Remember how I said Noor didn't have time to destroy everything when they arrested her? They found her notebook with copies of her signals and codes. This was a catastrophic security breach, not because Noor told them anything, but because she'd kept records she shouldn't have kept. So training specifically told agents never to keep written records of codes and transmissions. It was too dangerous. If captured, those records could be used against the organization. And that's exactly what happened. The Germans used Noor's codes to send fake messages back to London, pretending to be her. They made the messages look authentic. They used her codes correctly. But they did not know about the security checks that each operator was supposed to include in their messages to prove they were transmitting freely and not under German control. Noor had been trained to include specific mistakes or signals in her transmissions if she was captured and forced to work for the enemy. Without those checks, London should have known something was wrong. But here's where things get tragic. The people at SO headquarters in London missed the warning signs. They thought they were still communicating with Noor. They sent information about upcoming operations, about other agents being deployed, about weapons drops, and the Germans intercepted all of it. Because of this intelligence failure, 3 more agents were captured when they parachuted into France. They landed right into German hands. One of them was Madeleine de Merment, who would later be executed alongside Noor. This wasn't Noor's fault. She never willingly gave the Germans anything. But it was a disaster nonetheless. Meanwhile, Noor was planning her escape. Twice, she tried to break out of the SD headquarters at Avenue Foch. Think about that. She was a prisoner of the Gestapo in the heart of their Paris headquarters, and she still tried to escape. Twice. The first time, she and another prisoner tried to get out through the roof. They actually made it onto the rooftop before being recaptured. The second time, she tried to climb through a window. Again, she was caught. After the second escape attempt, the Germans decided Noor was too dangerous to keep in Paris. They labeled her highly dangerous and sent her to Germany for safe custody. In November 1943, Noor was transferred to Pforzheim prison in southwestern Germany. And this is where her suffering really began. Pforzheim wasn't a normal prison. Noor wasn't treated as a regular prisoner of war because she'd been captured out of uniform conducting military operations. The Geneva Convention didn't protect her. The Germans could do whatever they wanted to her. She was put in solitary confinement, kept in chains. Actual chains on her hands and feet, only removed for short periods. The cell was tiny, dark, cold. She was alone for 10 months. 10 months of solitary confinement in chains. Let that horror sink in. No human contact except for guards. No sunlight, no comfort, just isolation, cold, and the knowledge that she might never leave that cell alive. The prison guards later testified that she was tortured regularly. They beat her trying to extract information. But Noor never talked, not once. She maintained her cover story. She protected her fellow agents. She kept her secrets. In that cell, surrounded by darkness and pain, Noor did something remarkable. She found a way to communicate with other prisoners. She scratched messages on a metal cup and passed it to other inmates. Her name, her real identity, her address in London. Small acts of defiance. Small ways of asserting that she was still Noor Inayat Khan, still human, still resisting. The German officers and guards who dealt with her were actually somewhat amazed by her. Here was this small, gentle woman who remained dignified despite everything they did to her. She never begged, never broke, never gave up. One guard later said that Noor maintained an almost serene quality even in captivity, like some part of her spirit was untouchable, protected by all those years of her father's teachings about inner peace and strength through faith. Think about what sustained her through those months. What keeps a person going in that situation? She had no idea if anyone even knew she was alive. She didn't know if the war would ever end. She had no hope of rescue. She was completely alone in the darkest place imaginable. But she had her faith. Her father's teachings about duty, about serving others, about staying true to your principles no matter what. She had her sense of justice, her hatred of what the Nazis represented, and maybe she had hope that her sacrifice meant something, that her mission had helped in some small way. 10 months. Noor endured 10 months in that hell. But in September 1944, the Germans made a decision about what to do with her and 3 other female SO agents, also imprisoned in Germany. On September 11, 1944, 4 women were transferred from various prisons to Dachau concentration camp. Their names were Noor Inayat Khan, Yolanda Beekman, Madeleine Damerman, and Eliane Pluman. Yolanda had been captured in January 1944. Madeleine was the one who de-parachuted right into German hands because they were using Noor's captured codes. Eliane had been arrested in March 1944. All 4 were SO agents. All 4 had fought bravely. All 4 were about to die. The journey to Dachau was overseen by a Gestapo officer named Max Wasmer, with another officer named Christian Oth, volunteering to come along because he wanted to visit his family in Stuttgart on the return trip. OTT wasn't present for what happened next, but Wasmer told him everything afterward, and OTT later gave testimony to Allied investigators. They arrived at Dachau on September 12th. The 4 women spent that night in a barrack at the camp. Think about what must have been going through their minds. They were in Dachau, one of the most notorious Nazi concentration camps. They knew they weren't there for a holiday. Did they talk to each other that night? Did they share their stories? Did they comfort each other? We don't know. But they must have known what was coming. At dawn on September 13th, 1944, the 4 women were taken from the barrack into the yard. According to testimony from another Gestapo officer and a Dutch prisoner who was at Dachau, what happened next was brutal, even by Nazi standards. An SS officer named Friedrich Wilhelm Ruppert was in charge of the execution. The 4 women were brought out one by one. Noor was the last. The Dutch prisoner, whose testimony came out years later, said that Noor was savagely beaten before her execution. The SS officer kicked her, hit her, abused her violently. Even at the very end, even knowing she was about to die, she wouldn't break. And then they shot her in the head. Her last word was liberté, freedom. Think about that. After everything they'd done to her the capture, the interrogations, the 10 months in chains, the torture, the final beating, her last word was about freedom, not a curse, not a plea for mercy. Just that one word that meant everything, liberté. The other 3 women were executed the same way. 4 incredibly brave women murdered by the Nazis for fighting against tyranny. Their bodies were cremated. The Nazis tried to erase them completely, like they'd never existed. But here's the thing about trying to erase someone like Noor Inayat Khan. You can kill the person, but you can't kill what they represented. You can destroy the body, but you can't destroy the impact they had, because Noor did make a difference, a huge difference. Those 3.5 months, she operated as the only radio operator in Paris. She coordinated weapons drops that armed the resistance. She sent intelligence that helped plan military operations. She helped establish escape routes that saved Allied pilots' lives. She kept hope alive when the entire Paris network had collapsed. After D-Day in June 1944, when Allied forces landed in Normandy and began liberating France, the French resistance rose up to help. They sabotaged German communication lines. They provided intelligence about German positions. They harassed German supply lines. And a lot of that was possible because people like Noor had kept the networks alive during the darkest times. But nobody knew what happened to her. After she was captured in October 1943, she simply disappeared. Her family didn't know. The SO didn't know. She was just gone, swallowed up by the Nazi system. It wasn't until after the war ended that the truth started coming out. Vera Atkins, that sharp intelligence officer from SO who'd approved Noor's mission. She made it her personal mission to find out what happened to all 117 SO agents who disappeared. Atkins went to Germany, tracked down former Gestapo and SS officers, conducted interviews, pieced together testimonies. It took time. Some former Nazis didn't want to talk. Some lied. But gradually, the truth emerged. Hans Kiefer, the head of SD in Paris, confirmed that Noor had been captured and had refused to give them information. Christian OTT provided details about the transfer to Dachau. The Dutch prisoner described the execution. Slowly, painfully, Atkins reconstructed what had happened to Noor and her fellow agents. And when the full story came out, people were horrified, but they were also inspired. After the war, the British and French governments had to figure out how to honor the people who made extraordinary sacrifices. And Noor Inayat Khan's sacrifice was as extraordinary as they come. In October 1946, Noor was mentioned in dispatches as a military honor, recognizing distinguished service. The French government awarded her the Croix de Guerre with a silver gilt star, one of France's highest military honors. This was fitting. She died fighting for France's freedom, even though she was British. But Britain had to wrestle with something more complex. What do you give someone who showed the kind of courage Noor displayed? They initially considered a George Medal or an MBE, but people who knew what Noor had done said that wasn't enough. In 1949, the British government made a decision. They awarded Noor Inayat Khan the George Cross, posthumously. You need to understand what this means. The George Cross is the highest civilian decoration for gallantry in the United Kingdom. It's basically the civilian equivalent of the Victoria Cross. It's given for acts of the greatest heroism or of the most conspicuous courage in circumstances of extreme danger. Only a handful of women have ever received the George Cross. Noor was one of only 3 female SOE agents to receive it during World War II. The others were Odette Sansom and Violette Chabot. All 3 had shown unimaginable courage in Nazi captivity. The citation for Noor's George Cross said it all. Assistant Section Officer Noor Inayat Khan, Women's Auxiliary Air Force, mentioned in dispatches, Assistant Section Officer Inayat Khan was the first woman operator to be infiltrated into enemy-occupied France and was landed by Lysander aircraft on the 16th of June, 1943. During the weeks immediately following her arrival, the Gestapo made mass arrests in the Paris resistance groups to which she had been detailed. She refused, however, to abandon what had become the principal and most dangerous post in France, although given the opportunity to return to England because she did not wish to leave her French comrades without communications, and she hoped also to rebuild her group. She remained at her post, therefore, and did the excellent work which earned her a posthumous mention in dispatches. It continued, the Gestapo had a full description of her, but knew only her code name, Madeleine. They deployed considerable forces in their effort to catch her, and so keen was their pursuit that she was unable to stay in any one place for more than a few days. Even the warnings of her friends and the dangers which she saw herself did not deter her from the task which she had undertaken. She was arrested on or about the 13th of October 1943, and during interrogation was imprisoned in chains. She made 2 spirited and brave attempts to escape, but eventually the Gestapo had her sent to Germany for safe custody, where she was imprisoned in shackles for the 10 months. She was executed at Dachau concentration camp in September 1944. But here's what really gets me. For decades after the war, Noor's story wasn't widely known. Some people in military circles knew about her. Historians specializing in SOE operations wrote about her. But to the general public, she was just another casualty of war, another name on a memorial. That started to change in 2006, when Shrabani Basu published Spy Princess, The Life of Noor Inayat Khan. Basu had gotten access to Noor's previously classified SO files, which had been released in 2003. She interviewed Noor's surviving family members, her brothers Hidayat and Vilayat. She pieced together the full story, and people were amazed. Here was this incredible woman with an extraordinary life story, Indian princess, Sufi mystic. Children's author turned spyhood shown unbelievable courage, and hardly anyone knew about her. Basu formed the Noor Inayat Khan Memorial Trust to ensure people would remember. And slowly, the recognition started coming. In November 2012, Princess Anne unveiled a bronze bust of Noor in Gordon Square Gardens in Bloomsbury, London, near where Noor had lived during the war. It was a major ceremony, attended by over 450 people, including Noor's family, veterans, diplomats from around the world. Finally, Noor had a public memorial. The bust shows her as she was young, gentle-looking, but with determination in her eyes. The inscription reads, Noor Inayat Khan GC, 1914 to 1944, Secret Agent, George Cross. In 2014, Britain's Royal Mail issued a postage stamp honoring Noor as part of their Remarkable Lives series. In 2020, she became the first South Asian woman to be honored with a blue plaque in London, marking places where notable figures lived or worked. Schools have been named after her in Suresnes, France, where she grew up. There's an Noor Inayat. Every year on Bastille Day, a French military band plays at her childhood home, Faisal Manzel, in her honor. In 2018, there was a campaign to put Noor on the British £50 note. She didn't win, but the fact that she was nominated shows how far her recognition has come. So why does Noor's story still matter? Why am I spending all this time telling you about someone who died 80 years ago? Because Noor Inayat Khan challenges everything we think we know about courage, about heroism, about what it takes to stand up against evil. Think about the Hollywood version of a spy. James Bond, Jason Bourne, cool operators who are natural killers, who never doubt themselves, who are basically born for espionage. That's not who Noor was at all. Noor was scared. Her training reports said so. She was afraid of weapons. She was clumsy in combat training. She was too trusting, too gentle, too dreamy. By every conventional measure, she shouldn't have been sent into the field, but she went anyway. And not only did she go, she survived longer than almost anyone. She became the sole link between London and the Paris resistance. She outmaneuvered the Gestapo for months. And when they finally caught her, she never broke. That's real courage. Not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. Not being naturally suited for something, but doing it anyway because it needs to be done. Noor's story also challenges our stereotypes about who gets to be a hero. She was a woman in a male-dominated world of espionage. She was Indian in an overwhelmingly white British military structure. She was Muslim, serving a Christian-majority nation. She was a pacifist in a war. She didn't fit any of the boxes, and maybe that's exactly why she succeeded, because she approached everything differently. Her genuine kindness made people want to help her. Her faith gave her strength when she had nothing else. Her outsider perspective let her see opportunities others missed. There's something else important here. Noor believed in building bridges between cultures. Remember what she said? She hoped Indians could win high military distinction to help create understanding between British and Indian people. Even in choosing to fight, she was thinking about connection and unity. That feels incredibly relevant today, doesn't it? In a world that often feels divided by nationality, religion, race, politics here was someone who embodied multiple identities and used all of them in service of a greater good. She was Indian and British. She was Muslim and worked alongside Christians, Jews, atheists. She was a pacifist who took up arms. She was a writer who became a warrior. She contained multitudes, and she proved that those apparent contradictions could actually be sources of strength. And let's talk about her faith for a moment. Noor's Sufi beliefs shaped everything about her. Sufism emphasizes direct experience of God through love and service. It teaches that all religions lead to truth, that compassion is everything, that you find the divine by serving others. That's what Noor did. She served, even when it cost her everything. In the darkest moment of the 20th century, when fascism was trying to extinguish human dignity and diversity, Noor Inayat Khan stood as a beacon of something different. She embodied tolerance, courage, and sacrifice. She proved that you don't have to hate to fight evil, you just have to love the good strongly enough. Think about what the Nazis represented: intolerance, hatred, the idea that some people are inferior because of who they are. And think about what Noor represented: universal love, religious tolerance, the belief in the fundamental goodness of all people. The Nazis killed her, but they didn't defeat what she stood for. Because here we are, 80 years later, still telling her story. Still inspired by her example. Still learning from her life. Her brother Vilayat later became the head of the Sufi Order International, continuing their father's work of spreading peace and spiritual understanding. He said of Noor, she was devoted to the path of light, and she remained in light until the end. I think that's beautiful. Despite everything's the darkness of Nazi captivity, the torture, the final brutal execution, she remained in light. She stayed true to who she was. There's also something important about how long it took for Noor's story to be fully recognized. For decades, she was just a footnote in history books, if she appeared at all. Women's contributions to the war effort were often overlooked or minimized, and contributions by people of color even more so. It took historians like Jean Overton, Fuller, and Shrabani Basu dedicating years of research to bring Noor's full story to light. It took activists and family members fighting for recognition. It took time for society to be ready to truly celebrate someone like Noor. But now she has her memorial in London. Her statue, her stamps, her blue plaque, schools named after her, books, movies, plays, documentaries about her life, a whole new generation discovering her story. In 2019, a film called A Call to Spy featured Noor's story, with Indian actress Radhika Apte playing her. In 2020, PBS aired a documentary called Enemy of the Reich, the Noor Inayat Khan story. In 2020, she even appeared in an episode of Doctor Who. Pop culture has discovered Noor, and that matters because it means her story is reaching people who might never pick up a history book. Young people seeing themselves represented in her story. People from minority backgrounds seeing that heroes come in all colors, all faiths, all backgrounds. But beyond the cultural recognition, I want to come back to something personal. What can we learn from Noor Inayat Khan's life that applies to our lives today? First, you don't have to be naturally suited for something to do it well. Noor wasn't a natural spy. She was scared, clumsy with weapons, too trusting, but she was also determined, intelligent, and deeply principled. She worked hard, pushed herself, and found her own way to succeed. Sometimes the people who seem least qualified end up being the most effective because they approach things differently. Second, your background is not a barrier. It's your superpower. Noor's diverse background, Dundian, American, British, Muslim, Sufi, artist made her who she was. It gave her perspectives and skills others didn't have. In our increasingly interconnected world, people who can bridge cultures and understand multiple perspectives are incredibly valuable. Don't hide your complexity. Embrace it. Third, courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. Noor was scared. Of course she was scared. Who wouldn't be scared operating alone in Nazi-occupied Paris with the Gestapo hunting for you? But she stayed anyway. She did her job anyway. Fear is normal. What you do with that fear is what matters. Fourth, your principles matter, especially when they cost you something. Noor could have stayed safe in England. She could have done easier war work. When the Paris network collapsed, she could have evacuated with everyone else. When captured, she could have cooperated and maybe saved herself. But she didn't, because her principles mattered more than her safety. She'd rather die than betray what she believed in. That's a challenging message in our modern world, where we're often encouraged to be flexible, pragmatic, to compromise our values when it's convenient. Noor's life says, no. Some things are worth dying for. Freedom is worth dying for. Justice is worth dying for. Protecting others is worth dying for. Fifth, kindness is not weakness. Noor's gentleness, her genuine care for others, her belief in human goodness, these weren't flaws. They were strengths. They made people trust her. They sustained her through darkness. They kept her human when the Nazis tried to make her break. In a world that often glorifies toughness and cynicism, Noor reminds us that gentleness and strength can coexist. In fact, sometimes the gentlest people are the strongest. And finally, your story might not be recognized right away, but that doesn't make it less important. Noor died alone in Dachau. She never knew she'd received the George Cross. She never saw the memorial statues or the stamps or the films. She did what she did without any guarantee of recognition or reward. She did it because it needed to be done. How many people today are doing important work that won't be recognized for decades? How many are fighting for causes that seem hopeless? How many are making sacrifices that no one sees? Noor's story says that your work matters even if you don't live to see it celebrated. Let me tell you what really hits me about Noor's story. It's that last word, liberty. After everything they did to her, she wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about the idea of freedom. That's what she fought for. That's what she died for. Not personal glory, not recognition. Just the simple, powerful idea that people should be free. And in a way, she got her wish. France was liberated less than a year after her death. Paris, her beloved Paris, where she'd grown up, where she'd studied and written and dreamed, was freed from Nazi occupation in August 1944, just 1 month before she was killed. She didn't live to see it, but she helped make it possible. Every message she transmitted, every weapon drop she coordinated, every resistance fighter she connected with London, all of it contributed to building the network that rose up to help liberate France. When Allied forces landed at Normandy in June 1944 and began pushing across France, the resistance was there to help, cutting communication lines, providing intelligence, sabotaging German operations. Noor was part of that, a crucial part. The only radio operator who stayed when everyone else left, the one who kept the light on in the darkness. There's something poetic about the fact that Noor, whose name meant light of womanhood, brought light to one of history's darkest times. She illuminated the possibility that one person, even someone small and gentle and supposedly unsuited for heroism, could make a difference. Today, when the world feels overwhelming, when problems seem too big for any individual to solve, when we feel small and powerless, Noor's story reminds us that one person really can matter. One person staying at their post, one person refusing to give up, one person keeping faith with their principles. That can change everything. So here's what I want you to take away from Noor Inayat Khan's story. You are stronger than you think. Your background is valuable, not a liability. Fear is okay, but don't let it stop you. Your principles matter more than your comfort. Kindness is powerful, and your contributions matter even if you never get to see how much. Noor never got to know that she became a legend, that her memorial would stand in London, that children would learn about her in schools, that her story would inspire millions. She just did what needed to be done, as well as she could do it, for as long as she could. And that was enough. More than enough. That changed the world. The next time you doubt whether you're brave enough, strong enough, good enough to do something difficult, remember Noor? Remember the scared young woman who loved children's stories and believed in fairies, who picked up a radio transmitter and walked into Nazi-occupied Paris. Remember how she stayed when everyone else fled. Remember how she never broke, even when they broke her body. Remember her last word, liberté, freedom. Not just political freedom, but freedom of the spirit. The freedom to be who you are, to stand for what you believe, to serve others, even at great cost to yourself. That's the freedom Noor lived and died for. And in the end, that's the freedom she found. Because even though the Nazis killed her body, they never touched her spirit. She died free. She died unbroken. She died having served the cause she believed in with everything she had. On September 13, 1944, in the yard of Dachau concentration camp, a British spy named Noor Inayat Khan was executed. She was 30 years old. She'd been a prisoner for 11 months. She'd been tortured, she'd been kept in chains, but she never gave the Gestapo a single piece of information. Her last word was liberté, and 8 decades later, we're still telling her story. We're still inspired by her courage. We're still learning from her example. That's the thing about light. You can try to extinguish it, but it always finds a way to shine through. Noor Inayat Khan was the light of womanhood, and her light still shines. If this story moved you, if it inspired you, if it made you think differently about courage or sacrifice or what it means to stand up for what's right, share it. Tell someone about Noor. Keep her memory alive. Visit her memorial if you're ever in London. Read the books about her. Watch the documentaries, because the best way to honor someone like Noor is to remember what she stood for, to remember what she sacrificed, and to try in our own small ways to live up to the example she set. We might never face the kind of darkness Noor faced. We might never be tested the way she was tested, but we all face our own battles. We all have moments where we have to choose between safety and principle, between comfort and courage. When those moments come, remember Noor. Remember the spy who wouldn't quit. Remember